welcome back, dear viewers. You're still watching Nile Cruise here on Nile TV International on the banks of the Nile River in Maniel Al-Roda, next to the famous Nilometer runner.
Muhammad, sustenance played a critical role in the foundation or the founding of Egyptian civilization. The Nile is an unending source of sustenance. The Nile made the land surrounding it extremely fertile when it flooded or was in when it flooded annually. Actually, the Egyptians were able to cultivate wheat and crops around the Nile, providing food for the general population. Water was vital to both people and livestock, and the Nile was also a convenient and efficient way of transportation for people and goods. In this context, dear viewers, we have with us today Dr. Isamil Hamed, and Dr. Isamil Hamed is a historian and African studies researcher. Very good day, sir, and it's a pleasure to have you with us in today's episode of Nile Cruise.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Hamed. Of course, the structure of Egypt's society made it one of the most stable in history. In fact, it might easily have surpassed many modern societies, and stability was an immediate result of the Nile's fertility, for sure. Dr. Hamed, how did the Nile shape the social life of Egyptians for thousands of years?
Yeah, so I think from the beginning of the Egyptian civilization, not from the history, because there is a big difference between a history and civilization. History started just with Egyptian documents, with the first document, that is the Ballad of the King in Armor, from 3200 BC. So that is the beginning of the history, more than 5,000 to 100 years ago. Civilization, anything before the writing, after that. So it does not need for anything. So the value of the Nile started from an early time of Egyptian civilization. So you know that Egyptians, for the earliest time of their civilization, they were just hunters. Okay, so they went on the mountains, and so they looked for the animals and anything that is just to feed themselves. So they were like the Bedouins, like the nomads. So they have no stable life, because at that time, more than 5,000 years ago, they did not know the Nile. So they were, you know, dispersed here and there in some communities. Till they found the Nile, so they found a main source and a permanent one for the life. Because the Nile, it means the water for Egyptians. So they started at that time to be settled on closer to the Nile. So they started to build houses. These houses, they became villages, and small villages, they became cities, and then provinces, and then. So it was extending the life. That was thanks to the Nile. Before the Nile, they were like Bedouins, nomads, and so on. So that is the beginning for the community, an Egyptian community, which is considered to be the oldest community in the world. So just the historians, they make a kind of comparison between Egyptian civilization and the Sumerian civilization.
Yes.
Sumerians, that they are the inhabitants of Mesopotamia and Iraq.
Yes.
You know. So anyway, the Nile gave the people the stability, and it was the beginning of the civilization, and then the history after that. So they started to know also agriculture, because before the Nile, before they were hunters. So just hunting the animals and so on. But with the Nile, so they started to know the agriculture. So they have the crops, they have everything. So the beginning of the life and the progress and the development step by step, as I said before. So it was such a way that we saw after that. In a way, for the Nile, I think we have some information that we should give the people. Nile itself, it came from a Greek word, which is the Nilus. Nilus, that is the name of the Greek god of the water. Okay, so that name started with the Greeks themselves. So when they came to Egypt, so they called the river, because Egyptians, they call it as Itiru'a. Itiru'a, it means the great river. And that is the same name that we found on the Bible, especially on the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus. That was considered to be like that. Even for the Bible tradition itself, so something very important, because they linked the Nile with Egypt. You know, that's how in the book of Genesis, especially on the chapter 12, when Abraham had the promise of God. So the tradition said that God gave Abraham Abraham, the prophet Abraham, gave him a promise. That is for the land between the river of Egypt till the Nile of Euphrates would be the land of your descendants. So even the Nile, it's linked to Egypt and the Holy Box. So we have a special link with such a river for us. Even with Herodotus, the famous Greek historians, when he came to Egypt in 445 BC, he found the value of the Nile for Egyptian. So he considered that Egypt is the gift of the Nile. Also, we should complete that, a gift of the Nile and Egyptians, because the Nile also is running in 11 countries. So I think it's not fair to be like that. So Egypt is the gift of the Nile and Egyptians, because the Nile, from the main sources of the Nile, we have the Ethiopian source with the Blue Nile, we have the Lake of Victoria with the White Nile, and then running in 11 countries. The farthest one from Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Eritrea, Ethiopia, South Sudan, North Sudan, and then Egypt. So all these countries, they have the Nile, but they did not have the same civilization, because that is the difference of the man. Here we have a special man, that is the Egyptians, who appreciated the Nile and made a god for the Nile, the god Habi, as a protector of the Nile, that also for not to hurt the Nile or to make any problem for the Nile, not to pollute the Nile, not to drop anything in the Nile. So they made a god as protector of the Nile that is for such a way. Nile, that is a long story. Nile is something very great for Egyptians. And even, I think, from all the great civilizations, they were linked to rivers. Egypt is considered, or Egyptian civilization, considered to be the civilization of the Nile Valley in Iraq, that is for Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia, it means the land of the two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, Digla and Furat, you know. Even for India, that is the Indus Nile. And in China, we have also the civilization started with the Yellow River, that is the famous river over there, you know. And even for the Greeks, the Romans, so every time the rivers, they gave the people the stability, and especially for our Nile. And also that's considered in the, we have a link with the Holy Box. Nile is considered to be a blessed river. Why that? And I think from a tradition related to Prophet Noah. Prophet Noah is considered to be the 10th generation of Adam. Noah, son of Lamech, Methuselah, Idris, Yared, Melael, Kenan, Enosh, Shet, Adam, and then, you know. So Noah, he had 3 sons. One of his sons, Ham, he had a son, is called Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim, after the flood of Noah, he preferred to come to Egypt. Before coming to Egypt, he told his grandfather Noah to give him a blessing and to bless him and to pray to him. So he said to him, what? He said, I should say that in Arabic and then I will translate that, because the context is very, the text itself is very important. Prophet Noah said what? اللهم بارك فيه وفي ذريته وأسكنه الأرض المباركة التي هي البلاد. And that is the origin of الدنيا. That is, there is a historical and religious tradition, because this tradition is narrated by Ibn Abbas. So we have a source for that. And it is mentioned in most of the old books about Egypt, and Makrizi, and Suyuti, and Ibn Abd al-Hakam, and all the big historians. اللهم بارك فيه وفي ذريته واسكنه الأرض المباركة التي هي البلاد مصر, that is Egypt. وغوص العباد واجعل نهرها أفضل أنهار الدنيا واجعل فيها أفضل البركات. That is the prayer of Prophet Noah to Egypt. That is to make the Nile as pleased the river. Even in the Islamic tradition, Prophet Muhammad, when he had the miracle of Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, when he goes up to heaven and he crossed Sidrat al-Muntaha and he saw the paradise, he said, that is in al-Bukhari, that is, we have a special source for that. He said what? I saw 4 rivers, their origin from the Nile, but they are on the earth. These rivers, 2 of them, they are apparent and they are clear for the people. Zahrani and Maharani, Zahiran, the Nile and Euphrates, okay? And another 2 rivers that they were hidden rivers, Sayhan and Jayhan. So that also another way for blessing of the Nile. So we have a very special river. We have a great river for Egyptians, and I hope that to see the Nile as its historical and religious values.
Beautiful.
Dr. Ismail, what are the historic events that the ancient Egyptians left behind about the Nile?
No, I did not.
What are the historic events
Yes.
or evidences actually that the ancient Egyptians left behind about the Nile?
So it means that evidences
Yes, evidences.
for being with the Nile, or what do you mean of this?
The ancient Egyptians,
Yes.
did they leave any evidence
Yeah.
behind about the Nile?
Yes.
That's the question I'm
The evidences for about the Nile
Yes.
itself. Yeah, sure. As I said that for Egyptians, they considered the Nile as a holy, so they made a god for that. So they made a temple for the god. So we have a temple of Habi as temples of all the other gods. You know, also it was a way for the priests, that is to exploit the people. So they invented like 1,000 gods. That is to exploit the people by the words of God or the words of religion. So they made such a number of gods. For every god, we have temples in everywhere, you know. And they made for every city a local god. And for every god, we have lots of feasts. So for that case, in the feast of the god, especially the feast of the birth of the god, the feast of the coronation of the god, when he became holy and we have a special position, and so on. So in every feast, so the people, they should give the sacrifice for the gods, and so on. You know, and at the end of the story or that event, so the priests, they collect everything. So they made a temple for the Nile and for the god of the Nile, for something like that. Also, in Egyptian texts, that we have lots of words that they talk about the Nile. As I said before, that they consider the Nile as the Itiru'a, that is the great river. And also they call it also as the great green, because the Nile for Egyptians was a symbol of fertility and a symbol of, you know, prosperity. So also they made Nilometer. So wherever you go to the south of Egypt, we have Nilometers in the temples of Edfu and Komombo and Dandara. In all the temples that they are related to the Nile, they made a Nilometer, and I think we have a special one of these, but that was from the Islamic time, not from the Pharaonic time. So for Egyptian also, they started the construction of their pyramids during the Nile flood, especially in the 4 months and that season of the flood. So they called the people, okay, for whom that they would like to come to the mountain and then to live on the village that the Pharaoh made it for the workmen, in order to be there and to work, and then also to give them a prize or money for that. Not money especially, but to feed them and their families. Because during the flood of the Nile, the people, they were like unemployers, so they didn't have work. So they should be at home. So what kind of work that they can do? So pharaohs at that time, they were very smart. That is to benefit of this time, to call the people, for anyone who would like to share and to participate in the construction of the pyramid, to go up to the mountain of Giza or to the mountain of Saqqara or elsewhere in order to make the construction. Till the end of the flood of the Nile, so the people, they go back home, that is to have their normal life. And pharaohs at that time, they were charged to feed the workmen and their families. So it was a kind of charity at that time to benefit of the value of the Nile and to have something like that. I think evidences, they are so great, and I think wherever you look, wherever you go to Egypt, to Luxor and Aswan and so on, and to see the Nile valleys, okay, so you can appreciate something like that for the evidence of the Nile.
Beautiful, Dr. Hamid. You are indeed very, very informative.
Yes.
Sir, how did the Egyptians regard polluting the Nile throughout the years? I mean, in the Pharaonic era, for instance, how did they look at those who pollute the Nile, or the issue of the pollution of the Nile?
It was considered to be a shame for anyone. It was something like a crime. When you throw anything, when you drop anything on the Nile, it is something of crime, okay, or a shame for anyone. So they made some prayers and some magic prayers and formulas, okay, to protect the Nile for any silly one who would do anything to hurt the Nile. Because hurt the Nile, it was a great shame for the people at that time. And I think, from my vision of the life of Egyptians, so anyone who was catched to drop anything on the Nile, I think he was arrested by the government, or for the people that they take care of this, in order to be punished, because it was a great punishment for anyone to pollute the Nile purposely, someone to drop something or to do that, because it is a holy river for Egyptians. And even also, when the Muslims, they came to Egypt, also we should make a link for that and that. We cannot be separate of this, because also that is my specialization,
Yes.
to be in the medieval ages, so in Islam. And even for Islam, when the Arabs, they came to Egypt, you know that we have lots of stories of that. The Nile itself became as a source for to give the people another a chance for life. In the time of the Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, at that time it was Amr Ramada. It was very famous for Al-Medina, and they did not that that even that was not raining for a long time. So it was a very dry time for people, no agriculture, so no life for the people. So Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiallahu anhu, he sent a message to Amr ibn al-As. He told him that you live in Egypt, and you live in prosperity, and you have all kind of wealth, and you left us here with such a dramatic time. So give us anything of that you have, okay, in Egypt. Because something very strange, across the history, wherever the famines and starvation happened on the earth, not in Egypt. And even for the story of Joseph himself, when that happened, so...
do we know where exactly Prophet Joseph was in Egypt?
Fayoum.
Al-Fayoum.
Yeah, and I think from Islamic sources they said, and they told us, that Fayoum was built by Joseph himself. Okay? So he was there, and even the river...
There was a mention of Bilbais as well, wasn't it?
What?
I mean, Bilbais?
No, so
there
far.
Was no, or Shar'iyya.
That is Fayoum.
It was only
the Oasis Fayoum.
Fayoum.
Fayoum, that is closer to Bani Suwaif. That is about 100 kilometers to the south of Giza. So it was built by Joseph himself. That is in all Islamic sources that they talk about that. And even there is Bahr Yusuf, the Sea of Joseph, that linked between the river Nile and the Oasis. So it was dug by Joseph himself. And even, and according to Islamic sources, that he was buried on the river itself, on the river Nile itself. So Amr ibn al-As, he made a canal that to link between the Red Sea and the Nile. That is to send the caravans and to send all kind of aids and helps for the Caliph in Medina. And then they gave him, and he told him, I will send you a caravan with food, with everything, the beginning on you in Medina and the end on me here. So you imagine that the distance between that and that, so he made it. And from that time we have the canal, that, and also we have the first idea to link between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean by the Nile itself. So also even across that time.
Beautiful, Dr. Hamid. I mean, we're really enjoying this, but unfortunately our time is up now. We do hope that your time allows for future appearances with us here on Nile, because it's been very informative. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Isamil Hamid,
so
historian and right. Dear viewers, right. We'll be taking a short break now, and we'll come back with another distinguished guest here on Nile Cruise with Honorable Ustaz.
Stay with us, dear viewers, and don't go away.